Hello class, I hope you're doing well. This week we are going to continue our conversation about texts and sort of like iterations of texts and like that sloppy business I told you about last week. And we're going to talk about intertextuality. So intertextuality is a term popularized by literary theorist Julie Kristeva in 1966. Simply put, this term is used to describe the practice of one text making some kind of reference to another text. Now, please note when I use the term text here, I am not referring to literal words on paper, but rather I'm referring to any sort of print or digital or other medium that delivers some kind of story or information. So in academic terms, when we talk about a text, particularly when you're in like an English or humanities class, that might mean a range of things, such as a literal book, perhaps a filmic text, a musical text, a video game, a music video, an audio drama, a television show, etc. Okay? So in essence, what intertextuality is getting at is that there is this vast network of connections, inspirations, and similarities that can be found across different kinds of texts. Now, these references, similarities, etc., they can sometimes be direct in their nature, and sometimes they are more indirect. So first, let's talk a little bit about direct intertextuality. Now, direct examples of intertextuality occur when a creator is essentially self-aware of the reference that is being made and likely knows that the audience, or at least some of the audience, will also be privy to whatever this reference they're making is. Direct references are usually done in the form of either an allusion, 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 parody, or pastiche. So for example, Shelf Silverstein, a popular children's author, once wrote a poem called Alice. And this was found in his work or collection of poetry called Where the Sidewalk Ends. And the poem reads as follows. She drank from a bottle called Drink Me, and up she grew so tall. She ate from a plate called Taste Me, and down she shrank so small. And so she changed while other folks never tried nothing at all. Now, clearly, this is a direct reference to Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland or Alice Through the Looking Glass. There are a couple of books. And it is directly referencing scenes when Alice consumes food or drink and uses that to change her size in one direction or the other. Now, for the casual reader of Silverstein's work, even if they had never read Alice in Wonderland or were completely unaware of any sort of the text that came out as adaptations or whatever to Alice in Wonderland, they could still read this poem and understand it for the most part or whatever. But for those who are familiar with Alice in Wonderland as a text, this poem probably holds a little bit deeper meaning. And the people who have read or are familiar with Alice in Wonderland have probably a little bit of a different understanding of what Shel Silverstein is trying to get across in this poem than those who do not or don't have that familiarity with Lewis's text. So for example, if you have read Alice in Wonderland and then came across this poem, you kind of understand some of the deeper meaning, like Alice was adventurous and curious, and because of that adventurousness and that curiosity that she held, she went on these big adventures that most of the people in her real life probably never would have dreamed of having, right? So another example of direct intertextuality, if you have ever heard of the female rapper Iggy Azalea. A few years ago, she came out with a music video for her song Fancy. And she made a music video that if you've ever watched it, and if you've ever watched the film Clueless from the 90s, then you know that that music video is directly referencing the film Clueless. Not only does it imitate scenes, but it sort of follows the direct storyline of Clueless. So now let's talk a little bit about what indirect intertextuality is. Indirect intertextuality is an ideology that posits that producers of text will likely be inspired or influenced by texts or works that they have already heard or seen before their making of whatever they are creating. And thus, some remnants of whatever works that the creator has seen, read, listened to, or heard, or whatever prior to their creation will in some way kind of find its way into their work in some way, shape, or form. In a lot of ways, arguments around indirect intertextuality are rooted in this idea that all art is in some ways derivative, right? And derivative means inspired by, influenced by, or direct descendants of other works, right? So an example of indirect intertextuality might be from the Harry Potter works. There is a scene in which Ron and Hermione and Harry all have to play a game of wizard's chess using life-size or giant pieces on a giant chessboard, right? For anyone who has read the works of Lewis Carroll or Alice in Wonderland, so another Alice in Wonderland, sorry, it's just what I'm familiar with, or at least one of the things, then you would know that in Alice in Wonderland, the queen uses giant chess pieces or life-size chess pieces as her minions, right? So here, although not necessarily a direct reference, maybe J.K. Rowling didn't necessarily mean to have that reference to Alice in Wonderland there. Nonetheless, there is that similarity in having sort of those life-size chess pieces. That idea of giant chess pieces is not necessarily original to J.K. Rowling's work, right? There is precedent for that kind of gigantuan piece, right? Or chess pieces, rather, from Lewis Carroll, right? So although her reference to that may have been not on purpose, for anyone who's familiar with that work that came before J.K. Rowling's work, that might still be a reference to the audience member, right? That might, in essence, as a result of that, influence or paint their sort of understanding of Rowling's work as a result. So similarly, if we look at a music video such as Beyonce's Run the World Girls, right? That music video, if you've never watched it, you can probably pull it up somewhere now if you'd like. It has sort of this like post-apocalyptic kind of theme to it. And so anyone who has watched that, and if they've also watched shows like, or films like Mad Max, from the 80s, for example, I know that there was a Mad Max more recently, but that was also an adaptation or a reimagining of a film from like the 80s, 70s, maybe even 70s or 80s. I don't know. I'm not going to look it up right this second. It's way older than all of you probably are. So anyways, the sort of themes there, that sort of post-apocalyptic kind of world, if anyone who had seen like sort of Mad Max or whatever before they watched the Beyonce video, or even in the opposite direction, right? They probably have a different understanding of that video or sort of understand that post-apocalyptic theme based on sort of references from before, right? It sort of just shapes the understanding of the audience member, whether or not that theme was meant to directly be related to or derived from or whatever, from like Mad Max or things like that. Now, whether or not the music video director of Beyonce's music video meant for that connection to be made, or whether or not they meant for that sort of Mad Max post-apocalyptic theme to be in reference to films like Mad Max. I don't know. It's not directly made clear to us as the audience, right? But as someone who was familiar with like Mad Max, right, you can see sort of that thematic connection, right? That's kind of a primer on what intertextuality is, what the two different kinds are. So kind of think about this as we go through some of the works in this class, because obviously, if you've looked through the syllabus, and as you're probably noticing, we are looking at works that have several different iterations, right? So first we watched and read The Lottery, right? The short story versus the film. Then we read The Souls of Black Folk, and then watched Us, which is a horror film. And that was definitely like a little bit obscure and not necessarily a direct reference, but I kind of asked you if you saw things like the theme of double consciousness in there. But then also, as we go through, like coming up in the coming weeks, we're going to be reading a graphic novel versus the novel version of it, and then watching a film to see if we can see some connections there. So we're kind of like going through and trying to see what kinds of connections are being made. Obviously, some of them are going to be more direct. For example, we're going to be watching the film O versus or putting it up against Shakespeare's Othello. And although O is an adaptation of Othello, it changes it dramatically. It updates its, the time that it's taking place and sort of the situationally how things play out a little bit. So it's kind of interesting to watch and see how stories like change from one medium to the other, but also how stories are sort of told or referenced or reimagined or interpreted or inspired by others. Like I said last week in my other lecture, it's just adaptations is messy business, and like reimagining and reinventing and having inspiration of other stories, it's all a messy business, and we're going to continue to talk about it in this class. So anyways, thanks for watching my rambling. I hope you all have a good week, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.